Good morning, YouTube pedal nerd people. I'm getting a lot of questions about the switches from Joyo and how to use it and what the trigger outputs are for. So I'm thinking there's a lot of confusion, and probably about other companies as well. And I think I've kind of become the tech support for Joyo, as many questions as I am answering on especially the PXL Pro. So I'm going to give you a long overview over the different switches they have, what they do, how to use them, and what your options are so you can make an educated buying decision. If I'm talking too much for you, switch the channel. There's this little, back button. Find someone who does it quicker. I don't really give a flying rat's ass. Now, flying rats. How would you give a flying rat's ass? Would you chop it off? Would you give the whole rat, but ass first? I don't know. You find out. So, let's look at the different options. We got the PXL4. There's a full video of this already on my channel. Now, what does a switcher looper do? Now, when we say looper, a lot of people assume or think of the little box that will sample your guitar signal for several seconds, up to who knows how many minutes, and then just loop it. That is also called a looper. Now, this is called a looper because it actually has several loops and it puts your pedals in loops. But I'm going to call it a looper switcher because it switches between the different loops. Now, this is a very simple form of it. What happens is the guitar signal goes in and goes out. And it goes through 4 pedals from right to left. Okay? Always, that's important, from right to left in this case. And instead of wiring all 4 pedals in series, each pedal next to each other, you wire each pedal individually into the looper. So the looper goes out into the pedal, back into the looper. So loop number 1 is your drive. Loop number 2 is another drive. Loop number 3 might be a chorus. Loop number 4, let's say a delay. And now the looper has individual signal chains for each of the pedals, which means it can save the on-off status for each of the loops in presets. Okay? And if I hit A, and I've programmed this before, I could have drive 1 with the delay. If I hit B, it could turn these 2 loops off and turn on the other 2 loops, meaning you would have switched 4 pedals, these 2 off, these 2 on, with the click of 1 single button. So you could actually do very complicated, 8 pedal clicking functions by just touching 1 button with a looper. You can even switch your channel on your amp if you have a more complicated looper, as we will see. So that's what these things do, more or less. Important, obviously, it does not switch your pedals on and off. That's what you have to remember. Your pedals do not get switched on and off. They're always on. So they're always on in the loops, and it simply turns the loops on and off. And the good thing about that is, on a normal pedal board, let's say you've got 10 pedals on there, your signal will always go through all 10 pedals. And you turn the individual pedals on and off, which means that the signal quality of the signal going through the pedal is important. So it's very important to have true bypass, or to have a buffered pedal or whatever. So to have a high quality signal going through the pedal in case it is not on. Now with the looper, it doesn't matter. Because if only pedal number 1 is on, the signal doesn't even go through the other 3 pedals. Okay, so a looper will also shorten your signal chain to only the pedals that are necessary. Of course, using high quality cables is always a good idea. Any second now the postman should ring and bring me 200 euros worth of adapters, plugs and cables, and I will spend several days soldering loads and loads and loads of high quality cables so that the pedal boards I'm going to build for you and show you how to do it have the highest quality cables. And you can easily spend 30 to 50 euro on a high quality cable. Now with the looper you need twice the amount of cables, because usually from A to B, from pedal 1 to pedal 2, you have one patch cable. Well, now for each pedal you've got two. So for a looper like this with 4 pedals, you need 8 patch cables, plus of course guitar in, guitar out. Okay, I'm going to show you how to wire this one up in a bit. So let's talk about the next step up from this. This is not going to be short, but hey, this is complicated. The next step up, and I got this in purple. You know, purple? Purple. Lila in German. Same idea. Okay? Oh, excuse me. On this one, you've got banks. So on each bank you have 2 sounds that you can switch. So you're on A, and let's say you want to get to the 3rd sound. You have to go bank up. Sound A is still in effect. And now you click on A or B, which will be the next 2 sounds. So that's a little bit limited to have 2 sounds at your disposal with one click. Now with the 8, you have also banks, but you've got 4 sounds at your disposal, which is pretty good. I mean, 4 sounds, most of us don't need more than 4, okay? So 8, I would say, is probably the maximum of sounds you can possibly come up with for a set. Unless you're doing really weird stuff. So same idea here. You go in, you go out, but this time 8 pedals or 8 loops, okay? And that's it. That's a PXL 8. Nothing more complicated. You've got the possibility of 8 pedals in front of your amp, which is where it makes sense with a looper like this. And the other benefit is you have 4 sounds, 4 presets that you can call up. There are other philosophies for loopers, for example, which I think is very cool. The Carl Martin octa switch. Carl Martin's philosophy is no banks, no nothing. You've got 8 buttons, okay? So you got 8 presets, octa, and that's it. So you don't switch banks, you simply have 8 presets available, and also 8 loops. And above each of the buttons of the switches are 8 little dip switches that you can switch with a screwdriver, which simply determines which of the 8 pedals is assigned to that button. Very simple to program. So you pretty much go in, you know, sound number 3, pedal 4, 5, that's it. So it's a very simple concept, very easy to program. I mean, these aren't complicated to program either, as we will see, but very cool, very simple, different philosophy than Joyo with the banks and the presets. Now, next step up. Actually, the next step up is the one that's already on the pedal board, but I can show you this one instead because they're exactly the same. On the pedal board is the PXL Pro, which is, as I said, exactly the same as the PXL Live, with the difference that the PXL Pro has 4 trigger outs and the PXL Live only has 2 trigger outs, but it also has MIDI capability, as you can see right there. So 2 trigger outs and MIDI. The PXL Pro has 4 trigger outs. Other than that, it's exactly the same. Now follow me. This is more complicated, definitely. It's also bigger. Can you see the whole thing? Woo! So, PXL Pro. You go in and loop 2 out, you go out. You could do that. Just like the PXL 8, you could have 8 pedals in front of your amp with the added bonus of having a mute switch. So when you click the mute switch, it engages the tuner out, which is here. So there's an extra out to tuner. So your tuner isn't even in your signal chain at all. It's just separate. Okay? So when you push the mute button, the tuner becomes active, but your guitar signal is still audible. If you push it again, state number 2, your signal is completely muted and you can tune to your heart's delight without annoying the audience. That's kind of neat. Okay, so it completely mutes your signal. You push it again, your signal's back in. Same dealio, bank up and down. You will see the bank and the sound number. So you see bank 1A, 1B, 2C, whatever. And 4 sounds at a time that you can have per bank. Now, the special thing about the Pro and the Live is you can, if you so choose, split these 8 loops into 2 groups of 4. Let me do that again. 2 groups of 4. Now, why would you want to do that? Now, hopefully most of you know that time-based effects, like reverb and delay, are better placed in the effects loop of your amp if you're using the amp distorted. If you're sending reverb and delay into distortion, it is usually an undesirable effect. It's usually muddy and fizzy and not nice. It doesn't sound good. So if you're using your amp, let's say in a 2-channel setting, and you're also using the drive channel or the distorted channel of your amp, it is a better idea to put your time-based effects into the FX loop of the amp, which could be serial or parallel. Serial means it goes completely through the effects, including your dry signal. Parallel means the effects get mixed in, which is of course keeping your dry signal, more pristine. So with the 2 loopers we've seen before, the 4 and the 8, all effects would be, all pedals would be in front of the amp, meaning pretty much you keep your amp clean and you're using pedals for drive and distortion. Now, if you're using your amp in a distorted way, let's say you switch to channel 2 and you also have your drive from the amp, you want your time-based effects in the effects loop. Now, you can do this with a looper like this because it has 2 individual independent loops. Now, what you do is you go into it and you go through 4 pedals or 4 loops. You could have several pedals in one loop. You go through 4 loops and then you go loop out 1 into the amp. So you go into the amp and you pretty much have a PXL 4 in this case. So 4 pedals in front of the amp. Now the effects loop will go out of the amp into loop 2, and you're looping these 4 loops into the FX loop, and you go out loop 2 into the FX loop of the amp. So pretty much 4 pedals in front of the amp, 4 pedals in the FX loop, but they can be switched with the same program. So you have a drive and nothing else. So on A, you got your favorite distortion in loop 1, nothing else, everything else is off. And on preset B, you have your amp distorted, or not even that. You have a nice chorus in front of the amp, let's say here, and you have a reverb and a delay in the effects loop, which would be here, and they get switched at the same time. So you pretty much have 2 loops, in front of the amp and between the preamp and the power amp of your amp. That is possible with the PXL Live and the PXL Pro. Now the PXL Pro, as I said, has 4 trigger outs, which is quite a bit, which means, and this is where a lot of people don't quite understand, they are 1/4-inch outputs. Most amps, the PAS behind me, the La Boga down there, down there, right above my thumb. I think the Engel Gigmaster up there, actually most of the amps I have, except for the Diesel, have channel switching that is simply a stereo or mono 1/4 inch cable. Let's say the Fender right there and the PRS right there, they both have stereo cable inputs from a foot switch, that comes with it, like a dual foot switch. So what you simply do is you go get yourself an insert cable, which is 2 mono cables going into 1 stereo cable. And now you could get the 2 mono cables going into 1 stereo cable on the amp, and then use the trigger outs, which are just, switches, to switch the channel on the amp and also switch the reverb on and off in the case of these two, or whatever your amp switching allows. Now, something like the Diesel has a more complicated channel switch. So any amp that has, a foot switch looking like this with several buttons on it, for example, anything, a Bogner Alchemist, Fryette, Signature X, a lot of the Engel amps, anything that has several channels plus mid boost or whatever you want to switch, is still switchable with trigger outs, but there's probably a proprietary switch in the back. Maybe an XLR cable, whatever kind of cable it is, but through that cable it's just coming, trigger inputs, trigger information. So you will probably have to get someone to manufacture you a cable that will not connect to the foot switch you have, but break out into 4 or 2 trigger or 1/4 inch cables. Any amp that simply has a 1/4 inch input for channel switching you can already do, okay? So if your amp is a lot more complex, it might actually cost you a couple dollars to have a cable made. It might also be that this is then not your solution. Now, the PXL Pro has 4 trigger outputs, which should take care of all of the switching needs. Or for example, it might not switch your amp. It might switch an effect. I used it, I have the D-seat delay on the pedal board that you will see, and the D-seat has an input for switching between A and B sounds. So it's got 2 sounds that you can save. And I can actually use the looper to switch between those 2 sounds on the delay. So any pedal that has a switch input, you can remote control with it. There is the Carl Martin Headroom Spring Reverb, which I reviewed, which is very nice. It has 2 inputs for remote controlling it, because it's very big and you might want to put it in a different location than where your pedal board is. And you could control it with the trigger outputs. Those trigger outputs are nothing but remote controlled switching, okay? There's a lot of confusion about what they do. So that's what they do. You can control anything that has a 1/4 inch input that says switch. Okay? Now, PXL Live, only 2 trigger outputs, but it has MIDI. Now, I haven't tested this puppy, but I looked in the manual, and it's a Chinese manual coming from, China. And they're usually hard to read anyway. Now we're talking about MIDI. MIDI is not easy for the guitar player. I studied sound design, and I actually know the binary code for MIDI messages, and I really know this shit, but it's not easy for me either. So probably reading the manual, you're gonna go nuts and you want to beat the living crap out of yourself with this thing. Okay, so we're gonna figure that out. Hopefully rewrite the manual, put something online. But this MIDI output could switch any MIDI device that you have. Let's say a Strymon pedal, they have MIDI inputs. One of the Eventide pedals, the H9 or the Pitch Factor, any of them have MIDI switching capability, so you could switch the programs on these pedal with the click of a button, by switching different loops, it can also switch the sound on your MIDI capable device. It could be a Rec FX processor. It could be your XFX, for example. So you have your XFX, you want to switch to different sounds, but also have effects in front of it. Absolutely doable. So this is very, very cool if you have any kind of MIDI controllable device. I know Engel has some MIDI controllable amps, I think. I know that Dietzel has, I think, the D minor, the D moll, and the Herbert. So as I said, there are a whole bunch of amps that are MIDI switchable, which means you could probably store, hello doggy, all the functions on the amp, including mid boost, cut, channel switching, anything, different master volumes. You could store that in programs on the amp and then switch it with MIDI from the PXL Live. Let's look at some setups, how to wire these. Okay, we're gonna start with the PXL 4. Very simple setup.